This is draft season, and we are right up against the NFL draft. John Schmelk, Tony Pauline with you. And Tony, the draft this year, this is our final mock, and it's really going to be your final mock. The last one we did, we kind of went back and forth and we alternated. If you guys want to draft like that, go check out the John Tuttle podcast. We just did one of those. So this is going to be different. Since Tony's on with the intel, this is going to be predictive. So Tony's going to make a pick for each team. I'm going to be kind of his director of college scouting / assistant general manager, give him some ideas, give him some thoughts. And if he disagrees, we can go back and forth, or we could just make the pick and move on in terms of what Tony's hearing and what we think is going to happen on draft night. And what Tony, and I guess we'll start here, I think this is going to be one of the most unpredictable drafts we've seen in a long time. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because, last year, we really weren't sure what the first pick was going to be until draft day. And even then, it was kind of undecided. I think right now we know who the Carolina Panthers are going to take with the initial selection of the draft. It's just after that, it's going to be mayhem, starting with the second choice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't know what the Texans are going to do. So let's start this mock draft, Tony, and get to it. Carolina Panthers, you said it. And my advice to you as your assistant general manager would just be, let's not mess around here. We've been talking about Bryce Young all year. He's the best quarterback in this draft, and we need one.
I think all of Will Levis hype and rumors are just smoke. They're just exactly that, a bunch of rumors. As we said all along, or as I've said all along, Bryce Young has come across as a genius in interviews. We saw that in the S2 cognitive test. Listen, I hate to be redundant, but if Bryce Young was 4 inches taller, 20 pounds heavier, 10 pounds heavier, he's one of the best quarterback prospects of the past 10 to 12 years.
We'd be talking about him in the same way we talked about Trevor Lawrence.
Absolutely. Probably the same way we talk about Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. But he's not. He is what he is. And at the very least, he's the best quarterback prospect in this year's draft. He's always been QB1 on my board from the get-go. Carolina didn't give away all that draft capital to move up to get a defensive player. It's going to be Bryce Young.
All right. Agreed. Houston Texans at number 2. For me, as someone that's in the Texans war room, I got to tell you, boss, it would be malpractice if we just sat here and picked a defensive player. No one's good enough to warrant that, in my opinion. If we're not picking a quarterback here, we got to find someone that likes C.J. Stroud or Richardson or Levis and have them trade up so we get more draft assets. The question is, can we make that happen? What are your thoughts?
I understand it from the general manager's point of view, Nick Caserio, but he's got a first-year coach, DeMeco Ryan, who was a defensive player, was a defensive player, a very good defensive player, who has a lot of power in that war room, who is demanding that he wants to start from the line as a scrimmage out and doesn't want to rebuild with a brand new quarterback that's got questions. So unless a great opportunity is offered to us and a bunch of draft picks are offered to us for a team that wants to move up and get one of those quarterbacks, I'm not going to take a quarterback right now. So it comes down to Tyree Wilson of Texas Tech or Will Anderson. Tyree Wilson is the better fit, but he's got some medical concerns. And, the second player of the draft can't help you if he's on the sidelines mending injuries. So we're going to go with Will Anderson. We're going to go with Will Anderson because DeMeco Ryans, as I said, was a terrific defensive player in the NFL. He's now a head coach. He can do a lot of different things with Will Anderson. Will Anderson is my second-rated player in the draft. So, the number 2 team is taking the second-rated player on my board, and it's going to a defensive coach, and they need an edge rusher. That's why I'm going with Will Anderson here.
All right, let's go to the car. And by the way, I should ask you this. Any updated intel, Tony, on who might be most likely to move up to 2 if Houston is indeed selling this pick? And frankly, Arizona at 3, trying to sell that pick. Who are the teams most likely you think that would try to move up?
I mean, I don't think the Raiders, maybe the Titans who want to move up to get a quarterback. But the way I see it, the Titans could sit at 11 and still get a quarterback. I think that I haven't heard any definites. There's going to be poking around. But the way it looks now, the quarterbacks are going to fall further than we initially thought. If you talk to a lot of people, there are still some people out there who think the quarterbacks are going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not of that opinion after talking with people.
All right, now let's go to the Arizona Cardinals. Much like the Texans, I think they need help everywhere. I think we just need better talent. find the best player, GM, at a premium spot, whether that's an edge rusher or an offensive tackle. What do you say?
You know, on Saturday, I put out a tweet that I was hearing that there was a team that wanted to move up to 3 with the Cardinals to take Paris Johnson, left tackle from Ohio State. And I took all kinds of grief about it. No, you're a line. This is line season, blah, 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 blah. And then on Sunday, I kind of explained it. And I said, I understand it. You know, left tackle is still a priority position on draft day. That's what teams want. They want left tackles, despite all the quarterback hype. And there are 2 really good left tackles in this draft, Paris Johnson and Broderick Jones. And Paris Johnson has cemented himself as the top left tackle. As of yesterday, I was hearing, and I posted it, I tweeted out there, that I'm hearing the Cardinals are actually going to take Paris Johnson with that selection because they need to protect Kyler Murray. I mean, they got to get offensive line help. So with this pick, I have the Arizona Cardinals selecting Paris Johnson, who is a phenomenal left tackle prospect, made the transition from guard to left tackle this year at Ohio State, did a good job of it, had a good combine, had a great pro day. I do think there's a possibility that the Cardinals could be selecting number 4, flip-flop picks with the Indianapolis Colts, and take Paris Johnson with that 4th choice. But I feel pretty confident that Paris Johnson's going to end up with the Arizona Cardinals.
All right, Tony. Do you think, by the way, if there is a trade at 2 or 3, does that happen on draft night when they're on the clock, or does it happen beforehand?
Yeah, well, it will be agreed to beforehand. I mean, it may not be announced until they're on the clock or once the draft starts. I think it's like anything else with this draft. I don't know. I mean, it's anybody's guess. And I hate to say that because I'm supposed to be the insider, but I haven't gotten any feeling on that, except for some teams that are looking to move down, which we'll talk about, the Cardinals being one of them.
All right, let's go to the Indianapolis coach at number 4, Tony. The only quarterback off the board is Bryce Young.
Yeah.
I know there's all sorts of rumors that they like Will Levis. Could Anthony Richardson be a fit here? Or does CJ Stroud like, oh, man, he fell to us. We got to take him. What are your thoughts? I do think they have to take a quarterback here regardless.
And they will. I mean, their new coach is an offensive coordinator from the Philadelphia Eagles who helped develop Jalen Hurts. And we saw what Hurts has done. I'm going to go with Will Levis. Because that's what I'm hearing. If I was making the choice, I wouldn't take Will Levis. I've been critical of Will Levis. But again, let's go back to that S2 cognitive test where Will Levis scored incredibly well. Let's go back to the fact that Will Levis is not a dummy. I mean, he did graduate early from Penn State, and he deserves credit for that. I have my concerns about Will Levis. I have my concerns that Will Levis is too much of a showboat, trying to show off his strong arm rather than being a complete passer. I think it's going to be difficult to make that transition. But, they look at the tools, not just the strong arm, the overall athleticism, the sort of, it borders on confidence. Some will call it confidence. Others will say arrogance. And, they need a quarterback. I mean, Chris Ballard, the general manager there, is on a short leash. Ever since Phillip Rivers, it's been a disaster at the quarterback position, which is why they're selecting 4. I'm going to go with what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is Will Levis. It wouldn't be my choice, but that's where I think it's going to go.
All right, let's go to the Seahawks at number 5. Tony, they have 2 first-round picks at 5 and 20, 2 second-round picks at 37 or 52. They were right on the cusp of the playoffs last year with Geno Smith. And a lot of people think that they will jump, and that's kind of the latest buzz here, that they will pick a quarterback in the first round, whether it's at 5 or 20. Does CJ Stroud, you think, tempt them here to play behind Geno? Does Anthony Richardson? Or do you think they just say, look, we need to improve our defensive front, but oh, wait, and Tyree Wilson's still on the board. I think Wilson's probably your best position player left, unless you want to go corner. I don't think they do. Or do you think a quarterback tempts them here at 5?
Well, I think the quarterback tempts them. The question is, do they take the quarterback? And I think it would be Anthony Richardson because, John Schneider and Pete Carroll like those long, freaky athletes, whether it be DK Metcalf, whether it be Tariq Woolen. They know how to really harvest the best out of those athletes. And I think that the fact is, if you take a quarterback here, Geno Smith would be a tremendous mentor for a guy like Anthony Richardson. That said, I'm going to go with another long, freaky athlete in Tyree Wilson, who's still on the board. They need an edge rusher. They need to really they fortified their offensive line last year on the edges. They now need to improve their defense on the edges. And Tyree Wilson does that. This is a bit of an underdraft because Wilson's my 3rd-rated player. He's being selected with the 5th pick. And they fit a need with a real good player. The question with Wilson is, Can he stay healthy? He's got a foot issue. He's got a back issue. That's not good. If Tyree Wilson starts to slip in the draft, it's because of those issues I just mentioned.
Do you think that they would consider Jalen Carter here? Seattle, they have picked guys with off-field issues before. How much do you think he's in the mix for Seattle at 5 and even Detroit at 6?
A lot of people in the league tell me they think that the Seahawks are going to take Jalen Carter. A lot of people that I know connected to Seattle say the franchise is just concerned about forking over guaranteed $30 million to a guy that's got some off the field issues, gets by on natural talent, really has to step up his game. So I'm going to go with the people that I've talked to who are close to the organization. I personally think that if the opportunity is available to them, the Seahawks will trade down from 5. Maybe to the Raiders, if the Raiders want to or itching want to move up for a quarterback, maybe to the Titans. I think that is a distinct possibility, especially when you look at the Seahawks history.
Yeah, and the Seahawks do move a lot, though. They do already have, let's see, 4, 6, 10 draft picks in this draft. So they certainly have plenty of picks. But, you're right. John Schneider likes to move around, so that would not necessarily surprise me. Another team with a lot of picks in this draft, the Detroit Lions. They have 2 1s, they have 2 2s, they have a 3, and then they have 4 picks in rounds 5 and 6. So do the math. That's 9 for them, Tony. They're picking here at number 6. I'll ask the same Jalen Carter question to you, or do we just go pick our favorite cornerback? And my guess is that Aaron Glenn would just relate to Devon Witherspoon a lot, similar size, similar personality, I think. What direction do you think they go?
That's who I have them selecting, Devon Witherspoon. And I think the key to that was when, they were moving away from Jalen Carter was when they traded away Jeffrey Okudah. Not that Okudah was a great shutdown number 1 corner, because he wasn't. He was another Ohio State cornerback that disappointed in the NFL. But the fact is, now they have a need at corner. We know this is a good corner class. Jalen Carter is a better prospect than Devon Witherspoon, but Devon Witherspoon is much more polished. He seems much more mature. You can use him in a variety of systems, whether it's bump and run, whether it's man, whether it's zone. He's feisty. He's instinctive. The deep speed does concern me. That's why Christian Gonzalez is the number 1 rated corner on my board, because he's bigger and he's faster than Devon Witherspoon, although he's not as polished. But again, this is a plug and play type of guy for a team that almost made the playoffs last year, has got most of its roster coming back, and really wants to take that next step.
And now, Tony, I don't know what the Raiders think about Jalen Carter, but I do know they need a cornerback, and Christian Gonzalez checks all the boxes. I think, McDaniels had from New England with how their corners are built there. And, we know how much the Raiders love drafting guys that run really well. Gonzalez certainly does that. I would imagine, unless they go Carter, Christian Gonzalez is the easy walk-up pick here.
I would think so too, but I'm going to go with C.J. Stroud.
Ooh.
And here's why. I reported last week that the Raiders were one of the teams that were looked at, could potentially move into the back end of round 1 to select Hendon Hooker. And Hendon Hooker was their 3rd-rated quarterback on their board. And their top 2 guys, Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, they didn't think either of those guys were going to fall to them. Well, C.J. Stroud is falling into the laps of the Las Vegas Raiders as we speak. And you look at Josh McDaniel, you look at the Jimmy Garoppolo contract. I mean, it's basically a 1-year contract. Josh McDaniel is a offensive guy. He is a quarterback guru, if you will, although I really don't have a lot of belief and faith in him. You're right. I mean, if Al Davis was still alive, they'd probably take Christian Gonzalez. But this is a different Raiders organization with Josh McDaniel there. C.J. Stroud's in their laps. And I think this actually may be a good situation, because C.J. Stroud can come in. He can sit for a year, doesn't have to be force-fed into the lineup, play behind Jimmy Garoppolo, and then take over in 2024.
Or at least until Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt, which is
there you go.
And seemingly sadly for him, and inevitability, and not through any fault of his own. All right, Falcons at 8 here now, Tony. This is interesting. The latest buzz on the Falcons, everyone's streaming Bijan. He's going to be the pick. Bijan's going to be the pick. But now Christian Gonzalez is there. Jalen Carter is still on the board. So you have some very talented players. What do you think the Falcons do?
Carter is enticing. The problem with Carter is this. People feel he needs to be taken out of his element. If he's in Atlanta, he's not too far from the element of Athens, Georgia, and the people that he hangs around. So I think the Falcons are a little leery of that. They fortified their offensive line in the postseason. Obviously, they got Desmond Ridder. You want to help Desmond Ridder, bring in another weapon. I'm going with Bijan Robinson. I mean, the fact is this: he's a top 3 rated, top 4 rated player on my boards. This is the 8th pick of the draft. Yeah, I know that the running back position is devalued. I don't think Bijan Robinson is going to fall all that far because he is such a terrific player. I think it not only helps the offense, it helps in the development of Desmond Ridder. And there are less questions or less character concerns, if you will, about Bijan Robinson than Jalen Carter.
Yeah, and I don't think it's undervalued for Arthur Smith, who obviously comes from Tennessee, where he had Derrick Henry. So, and Bijan can also be used as a receiver too, which could help them out in the passing game.
Yep.
All right, Bears at number 9, Tony. When we first started this process, we're like, boy, the Bears are trade out of 1. They could have drafted Jalen Carter, but they traded out of that pick. Well, guess what? They could still draft Jalen Carter. Do you think that's the pick here? Christian Gonzalez surprisingly still on the board. The Bears, I would think a huge priority has to be trying to help Justin Fields here as well on the offensive line, because they have to know what he is after this year. So if they want to pick a quarterback next year, they can. What direction do you think the Bears take?
I'm going to go with the latter. I think Jalen Carter is very enticing, and how ironic would it be if they traded down the 9, they got all that draft capital, and they still got the best player in the draft, or the player that everyone ranks as the best player in the draft. I also think corner is a consideration. Christian Gonzalez, I think, is great value here, but I'm going to go with Pete Skoronski because you're right. They got to protect Justin Fields. I mean, you made that commitment to him by basically moving out of 1 and moving away from the potential selecting any of the top quarterbacks at the time. So it seemed you got to protect Justin Fields, even if it's not Justin Fields and you select the quarterback in 2024, you got to protect that guy. I think Skoronski is a safe pick. I think Broderick Jones may be the better fit because he's left tackle, but I think with Skoronski, you're getting a potential right tackle who at the very least can be a dominant guard and going to help not only protect Fields, but help with the running game.
And now the Eagles are sitting there at number 10. They just made the Super Bowl, and the most talented non-quarterback is still on the board for them. Can they resist? Do they resist, Tony? Or do they think that the culture in that locker room for a team that just made the Super Bowl is enough to handle him with, Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and all those guys so that they can overcome maybe some of those immaturity issues and turn him into the dominant player he certainly can be?
Makes sense, but Jordan Davis is there, and I like Jordan Davis, but they said it may not be a good marriage because they may get back into old ways about with poor conditioning, things like that. Obviously, Jalen Carter has got to be a consideration, but I think the upward momentum, draft momentum anyway, favors Nolan Smith. And yes, the Eagles need an edge rusher. They also need an off-the-ball linebacker. In my opinion, Nolan Smith, will fill both needs. Obviously, he can't do both on the same snap, but he's a terrific athlete who is an outstanding linebacker. John, you go back to some of the earlier shows that we did when we were previewing the season. You yourself talked about how Nolan Smith was a first-round choice. Yeah. Then he got injured, kind of fell in the background. People kind of forgot about him, and he was ignored. Then he blows up the combine. I think Nolan Smith just fits a variety of needs for the Eagles as an edge rusher and as an off-the-ball linebacker.
Yeah, I think if Carter worries you with his off-the-field stuff, I think Smith is the pick here too. I think it just screams an Eagles type of pick. And other people have linked Van Ness here. I think picking Van Ness over Nolan Smith in this spot would be crazy if you're Philadelphia. Smith can just do too many different things. I think that's a home run pick. Tennessee Titans, number 11, Tony. There is a quarterback, not one of the top 4 quarterbacks, but a quarterback still sitting here on the board. Actually, I'm sorry, the 4th quarterback is here, Anthony Richardson and Hendon Hooker. I apologize. Both are on the board here for the Titans at 11. They still need help on the offensive line. Where do you think Tennessee goes? I would imagine they're going to want to get their long-term answer behind Ryan Tannehill.
And that would be Anthony Richardson. That's who I have in my mock draft. And the fact is Mike Vrabel feels that, he can make a mountain out of a molehill on the defensive side of the ball, but he needs an explosive offense, and he needs a quarterback that can run and be an explosive quarterback. That potentially is Anthony Richardson. Obviously, there's a lot of risk involved. As you said, they need help on the offensive line, but, there was talk about Tennessee wanting to move up to get Anthony Richardson. And the way it pans out, if quarterbacks don't go 2 and 3, or if there's only 2 quarterbacks in, say, the first 4 or 5 selections, there's a very good chance that Anthony Richardson falls into the laps of the Tennessee Titans, and I think they swipe him up.
All right, Anthony Richardson to the Titans. I like that pick. I think that makes a lot of sense, and he can sit behind Tannehill. Now, I'm going to make the Texans pick here at 12 and then reset who's off the board for everybody. But Texans at 12, Tony, will do that first. They drafted Will Anderson with the second overall pick. They did not go quarterback. Do they think about Hendon Hooker here?
I think they think more about potentially trading up. You talked about one of those teams that could trade up. I think that the Texans, with all their draft picks, all their draft capital, could potentially think about moving from 12 back into the top 8 or so to select C.J. Stroud. Now, I don't think they're going to reach for a quarterback here. Go back to what I said about DeMeco Ryans. He wants to build the team from the lines of scrimmage out. And, he got an outstanding impact defensive player at the start of it with Will Anderson. Jalen Carter's still sitting there. And, yeah, maybe it may not be a huge need, but DeMeco Ryans is a defensive guy. DeMeco Ryans is going to salivate the fact that he can not only get the second best impact defensive player in the draft, but he could also come away with the best player in the draft who happens to be a defensive lineman. So I think this is where the Jalen Carter fall stops. Let's not forget also, we were very critical, and I believe justifiably so, when Carter's agent said he's not going to speak with any team outside the top 10. And we talked about how, that may precipitate a slide or stop teams from trading up into the top 10 to draft Jalen Carter. Well, this checks that box because Houston was a top 10 team, and Houston had every opportunity to sit down and talk with Jalen Carter before the draft. So it's not like going against what I said, where it was going to hurt Jalen Carter by a team selecting outside the top 10 because they didn't get to interview him. Well, the Houston Texans had, with the second pick of the draft, had every opportunity to take their time and take as much time as they wanted to interview Jalen Carter and get between his ears. I just think with DeMeco Ryans at the helm, even though there's a pressing need of quarterback, DeMeco Ryans has a lot of say in that war room. They're going to go defense very early and very hard.
And if you would have told me and you when we were sitting out there day one of the combine in February that the same team would walk away in this draft with Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, we would have been incredulous as to how that could possibly happen. But here you go. That's why the NFL draft is fun and crazy things tend to happen. All right, here are the first 12 picks very quickly. Carolina Panthers, Bryce Young. Houston Texans, Will Anderson. Arizona Cardinals, Paris Johnson. Indianapolis Colts, Will Levis. Seattle Seahawks, Tyree Wilson. Detroit Lions, Devon Witherspoon. Las Vegas Raiders, C.J. Stroud. Atlanta Falcons, Bijan Robinson. Chicago Bears, Pete Skoronski. Philadelphia Eagles at 10, select Nolan Smith. Titans at 11 get their quarterback of the future, Anthony Richardson. And the Texans at 12 get Jalen Carter, whose slide finally stops. All right, Green Bay Packers at 13, Tony. They only have this selection because of the Aaron Rodgers trade. You can give your little thing on that if you want when the Jets pick. But Packers here at 13, there's a lot of noise that they might be looking to move up even further from this pick to find something. It's been nebulous what that something might be. I wonder, do they know Jordan Love is the future answer? Could Hendon Hooker maybe be an option for them? That, I think, is something nobody's talked about, which is interesting. Do they try to help Jordan Love with an offensive lineman or a receiver? But history says the Packers pick defense. So I think this is a huge wild card.
I think it's more than coincidental that the Packers, and part of the deal for Aaron Rodgers, went from 15 to 13 to hop ahead of the receiver-needy New England Patriots, especially with all the noise that, Jackson Smith-Njigba has absolutely separated himself from the rest of the receiver class. And I know that, as I reported last week, the Eagles were doing a lot of late work on Jackson Smith-Njigba. I never said they were going to select him, but they were doing a lot of late work. So you add all that together, and, I think the Packers, if they stay put, I'm going with Jackson Smith-Njigba. And it's more than ironic that just a couple of days after they trade Aaron Rodgers to the New York Jets, now the Green Bay Packers start selecting receivers early in the draft after bypassing great receiver, and people wondering, what was going on. But I think, could they trade up? Possibly. But I think if they trade up, I say if they stay put, it's going to be Jackson Smith-Njigba, which is one of the reasons why they wanted to get ahead of New England Patriots. Now, you could also say, well, they want to get ahead of the Patriots because they want to move up even further, and it's a little bit easier to move from 13 to 6 or 13 to 5 than it is from 15 to 5.
Yeah, I think that's true. And right, because if you wanted a tight end, moving up those 2 spots really wouldn't necessarily help you
No,
there.
not at
But
all.
for the wide receiver, it does. So I think you might be onto something there, Tony. I think that's a great point. All right, Patriots at 14. You notice they're wide receiver needy. They're also cornerback needy, in my opinion. And I'm looking at this board, and I can't believe this, but Christian Gonzalez has not been taken yet. I mean, I think this is. I mean, as your assistant GM, Tony, I implore you, select select Christian Gonzalez here.
Yeah. But Bill Belichick is saying, you know what? I can take a cornerback in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round and turn him into an outstanding player. We need a left tackle. We need offensive tackles desperately. So I'm going to go with Broderick Jones of Georgia here. A younger guy, Trent Brown. You don't know about his weight. I think he's got a year left on his contract. Broderick Jones is an athletic, agile offensive lineman, left tackle. I think that's the way they go.
All right. The Jets are probably very upset right now because, Paris Johnson is gone, Broderick Jones is gone, Peter Skoronski is gone, and they kind of wanted somebody to play left tackle, Tony. So you're now in the GM seat. You have Aaron Rodgers sitting there. What are you thinking?
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that the New England Patriots swiped away a left tackle from the New York Jets in the draft. That happened about 15 years ago with the kid from, even longer, from the kid from Purdue, who turned out to be a great player. The Jets just need a lot of help on the offensive line. I mean, they need left tackle, they need right tackle, they need centers. I'm going to go with Darnell Wright here. I think he's a plug-and-play type of right tackle prospect. I think there's a good chance the Steelers could take him at 17. I think the Jaguars could move up to get him if he starts to slide. But again, I mean, the Jets need it's funny, the Jets don't have a lot of needs on the team right now. But the needs that they have, especially in the offensive line, are desperate needs. and it's not like, the Jets basically need 3 starters on the offensive line, 3 good starters. And, they're all happy that they got Aaron Rodgers, or Aaron Rodgers can be running for his life or pulling himself off the field. So I'm going to go with Darnell Wright from Tennessee for the New York Jets here.
Good player. I think this is about the range where he starts, people start thinking about him too. All right, Washington Commanders here. All right, I keep bringing up Christian Gonzalez. I thought they've always wanted a corner all along, and I figured it would end up being Joey Porter Jr. or Deonte Banks. But now Christian Gonzalez is there, Tony. This, to me, is an easy one.
Hands down. I mean, it's great value. It fills a need. The guy's got tremendous upside. The way the earlier board played out, could the Patriots take him? Possibly. Could the Raiders take him? They probably should have, but the quarterback falls into their laps. And again, as far as I'm concerned, where we sit right now, the way the board has fallen, this is the great value pick of round 1.
Yeah, I think the Commanders would have to be thrilled if this happens in their spot. The Steelers probably not super thrilled right now because they could use an offensive lineman, and really there aren't any, I don't think, left that are worth the pick here unless you like Anton Harrison. So I would suggest we look elsewhere for that. I think corner is an option. You have Deonte Banks. You have Joey Porter Jr. with the lineage and connections to Pittsburgh, obviously, Tony. And maybe, I think some people have talked about wide receiver here. I'm not sure about that, but I would suggest in terms of value on the board, maybe one of the tight ends is there too. That are really good players. What are your thoughts for Pittsburgh, Mr. General Manager?
Deonte Banks. And you talk about connections, a couple things. Deonte Banks is moving up draft boards, or he's the hot name at the cornerback. I shouldn't say he's moving up draft boards because the boards are already set. But he's the hot name at the cornerback position right now. And as I said last show, there's talk that Deonte Banks could actually be the 3rd cornerback selected in this draft. Well, alas he is in this scenario. And you talk about connections. Deonte Banks' roommate is Mike Tomlin's son. Roommate at Maryland and friend at Maryland is Mike Tomlin's son. So Mike Tomlin has had a connection and a relationship with Deonte Banks long before Deonte Banks has become the hot name at the cornerback position. And those connections, those relationships really mean something. So he knows Deonte Banks. He knew Deonte Banks before everyone was talking about Deonte Banks as a potential 1st-round choice. Big corner, athletic corner, guy who showed tremendous ball skills, fits a need for the Steelers.
All right, let's get to 18, the Detroit Lions. They selected Devon Witherspoon at 6th overall, Tony. They have a lot of options here. Both tight ends are still on the board. Their head coach is a former tight end. They can always use another weapon on offense. I think they could use some help up front on defense as well as they try to improve that defense and get it where they want it to be heading into this season, where I think they expect to be not only in the mix for the playoffs, but perhaps even win the NFC North. So your thoughts for the Lions here at number 18?
I think it's going to be a tight end. I think Dalton Kincaid makes a lot of sense as a field stretcher, but Michael Mayer is more the Dan Campbell type of a player at the position. I mean, he's a two-way player, if you will, at the position. He's a terrific blocker. He's an outstanding pass catcher. Not the field stretcher of Dalton Kincaid, although Michael Mayer ran much faster than anyone expected at the combine, right? With that 4.7, we were thinking 4.8s, and no, the guy runs a 4.7. Just a matter of getting him to translate that speed on the field. Gets in a crowd, comes away with the catch. I think it'd be a sensational underneath intermediate receiver at the tight end position who can also block and open things up for the rest of the offense.
All right, let's go to Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 19 here, Tony. Their potential quarterback of the future and Hendon Hooker is still on the board. Brian Branch is a player that has a lot of value that's still on the board. You mentioned Dalton Kincaid is still on the board. Only one wide receiver is gone. The Bucs need a lot of help. Their head coach is defensive oriented, but I think they could use a lot of help on the offensive line. I'm just not sure there's value there at this spot unless you want to go like O'Cyrus Torrence or something like that. Your thoughts here for the Buccaneers?
Another guy who's still on the board is Myles Murphy of Clemson. Yep. The fact is this: Shaq Barrett had a bad Achilles injury last year. Joe Tyron has really never lived up to expectations for the team. You said they got a defensive coach. I think it's going to be Myles Murphy because the way they play that system, I think Myles Murphy's a perfect fit. I think he's got a lot of upside. The surprise pick here could be Quentin Johnston. So keep an eye out for that.
Quentin Johnston. Wow. Put him with Mike Evans, huh? Would Mike Evans then be on the move, you think, somewhere? Would they try to move him?
I think both of those guys have 1 year left on the contract. I may need some correction on that, but when I looked last night, I believe both Evans and I believe Godwin only have 1 year left on their contract.
All right, let's go to the Seahawks at 20, Tony. They already selected Tyree Wilson at pick number 5. You said they'd be tempted by quarterback. Do they give in the temptation here?
No. Like the 5th pick, I think that the Seahawks are really going to work to move down from this selection. Move down to the late part of round 1 where they address the interior offensive line. Now, I have them taking O'Cyrus Torrence here. But I think what's going to happen is they will not be selecting with the 20th pick. They could be selecting 25, 26, 27, 28, somewhere along those lines. And it'll be either O'Cyrus Torrence or potentially Joe Tippmann, who I know they like a lot, who plays the center position, which is a real area of need for Seattle.
And just a heads up, I would not be shocked if the Giants consider to trade up either if they see one of those playmakers on the board that they really, really like in wide receiver. All right, Los Angeles Chargers here, Tony. I think, in my opinion, it's an arms race with the Chiefs. Can you outscore Kansas City? Kincaid's still on the board, which I think would fit well with their wide receiver core, but only one wide receiver is off the board too. So your thoughts here for the Chargers?
I'm going to go with Jordan Addison of USC. I know a lot of people, Zay Flowers is the hot name at the receiver position, but, Jordan Addison's a little bit taller, very sure-handed, as good a route runner as Zay Flowers, doesn't have the field stretching speed or is not as fast as Zay Flowers, but I think he's a terrific target. Really doesn't have to move far from where he is from USC to the Los Angeles Chargers. So I take Jordan Addison.
All right, let's go to the Baltimore Ravens at pick number 22, Tony. They added Odell Beckham Jr. at wide receiver in the offseason. They could use some help on defense at pass rush and at corner. Their defense took a bit of a step back last year. What do you think the Ravens are going to consider here?
They need a big corner. Joey Porter Jr. is there. I think breaks the heart of a lot of teams right behind him, including the Vikings, the Jaguars, and the Giants. They're going to go with Joey Porter Jr. To fill the need of cornerback. And they've had success selecting cornerbacks. So this makes a lot of sense.
Given that Steeler-Raven rivalry, that's going to be interesting for Joey Porter on how he reacts to his son putting on the gold and purple there. That'll be interesting. Vikings at 23, another team that maybe is looking for a replacement for Kirk Cousins down the road. He has 1 year left on his deal, Tony. But, boy, their defense stunk last year. They could use help on that side with a new defensive coordinator as well. Your thoughts for Minnesota?
I'm hearing that they could reach for a cornerback like Cam Smith, but I have Hendon Hooker coming off the board here for a couple of reasons. Number one, This is where I think Hendon Hooker ends up in the draft, in the bottom third of round one. They want that fifth-year option. And like you said, Kirk Cousins has got 1 year left on his deal. We know Hendon Hooker's not going to play in 2023. This is why I say Hendon Hooker is in the best position of any quarterback in this draft. He'll have to be able to sit behind a veteran, a seasoned veteran for a year, observe and absorb, and then be ready to take over the duties in 2024.
I'm sitting here as the assistant general manager of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'm saying to myself, I got a good roster. I feel good about it. I can just go find the best available player on the board. Who is it? And you know what? Dalton Kincaid's still on the board. Evan Ingram's only on a 1-year deal. I think that's a really good value selection here. As I bring up my board here, Tony, other guys that jump out at me at this spot that are not off the board, Brian Branch, who's just a really good football player. He's still on the board. Lucas Van Ness is still on the board if you like him. Those are the guys to me. Will McDonald, if you want to go a different type of edge rusher. Those are the guys to me, and the Jaguars have some freedom here to just pick the best player available. But the number one guy left on my board that's still there is Dalton Kincaid, hands down.
Yeah, but they do have Evan Engram, and who knows? Maybe if Engram is in the midst of a good season, maybe they hash out a long-term deal with him after last year's tremendous campaign by the tight end. I'm told that the Jaguars covered 3 players: Devin Witherspoon, who won't be there, Deonte Banks, who will unlikely be there, and Lucas Van Ness. So I'm going with Lucas Van Ness. Now, I think the problem here for me anyway is the Jacksonville Jaguars have expended a lot of capital on this type of players. Remember Chazon from LSU, Allen from Kentucky, the smaller edge rusher type of guys, and they've gotten okay returns. People forget that Clavon Chazon's still on that team. But this is the player that they like. They want another edge rusher. I think Van Ness, there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road. I think he could be a real good player down the road as he fills out his frame and gets bigger and stronger and physically matures. But you saw the production, even though he wasn't a consistent starter at Iowa. You saw the outstanding combine, and they look at what he can be a couple of years down the road. I'd really like to put an offensive tackle in here. I mean, you got to really start to build pieces around Trevor Lawrence, who looks like he's going to be everything we thought he would be 2 years ago. But again, I think they're going to go defense, and I think it's going to be Lucas Van Ness.
All right, Giants on the board at 25 here, Tony. A couple of wide receivers still on the board, and Quentin Johnston, Jalen Hyatt, and Zay Flowers. Those are 3. I'll throw out Dalton Kincaid again, though he's a little duplicative of Darren Waller. Giants need a center. Centers are still on the board. The cornerback position is wiped out. That's a spot I would look at if one of those top 4 were there. What are you thinking for Big Blue here?
I know they like Darius Rush and Darius Rush of South Carolina, DJ Turner of Michigan. It's too early to take them. The problem is everyone's going to say Zay Flowers, Zay Flowers, Zay Flowers. The problem is Zay Flowers a true number 1 receiver? And my answer is no. And the Giants need a true number 1 receiver. Zay Flowers is a bit redundant to the type of pass catcher that they have. So why just bring in another body to basically add to that redundancy? Even though he's good, I just don't think he's a number 1 receiver. I don't think there's any real receiver in this draft that checks off the boxes as an elite number 1 receiver. So I'm going to roll the dice and go with the same guy that I've been mocking to the Giants since January. And that's going to be John Michael Schmidt, who I know that they like a lot. Whether they would take him here or not, we'll have to wait and see. But they made a huge investment in Daniel Jones. Obviously, they franchised Saquon Barkley. We'll see how that works out. You're hoping that your former guard can play center. John Michael Schmidt, I know they like a lot. They also like players from Boston College, which would kind of lend one to believe they're going to go in the Zay Flowers direction. I just think that Zay Flowers to me is not a number 1 receiver, which is what the Giants need. They would love an outside cornerback. A top outside cornerback is not available. There is a desperate need at center there. You want to take the team one step forward. You better protect Daniel Jones. You better find a way to strengthen the interior of that offensive line and open up holes for Saquon Barkley. That's why I'm going with John Michael Schmidt.
All right, Tony, final one here, our final team in the NFC East to make their pick here, though you have the Eagles have a second one that pick number 30. Dallas Cowboys up, and for me, and I've mentioned this name a few times already, I feel like the same thing I did with Christian Gonzalez. Cowboys lost Dalton Schultz. Dalton Kincaid's there. This just seems to check a box. I would run to the podium here for Kincaid.
I would too, but Zay Flowers is still available. And they've been doing a lot of work in recent weeks on the receivers, which leads me to believe that it's going to be a receiver I have Zay Flowers rated slightly higher than Dalton Kincaid. I agree with that. The pick could be Kincaid, but when I look at everything, look at Dak Prescott, this is a tight end rich draft. So they can get a good receiver in rounds 2 or 3. They could potentially get a decent wideout as well as a tight end. But I think it's going to be Zay Flowers here, a guy who knows how to separate, knows how to get open. Another pair of hands for Dak Prescott. I apologize.
All right, wow, weapon for Dallas there. That's interesting pick. And that probably makes the Bills a little upset because they're probably looking for a weapon too. They might have thought about Zay Flowers, Tony. So what are they left with?
I'm going to go with Brian Branch of Alabama. I view Branch as a true safety. A lot of people say slot corner. I think the way the Bills use their defensive backs, Brian Branch is a true free safety. They need a safety, a long-term answer at the safety position. I would agree with you that, receiver is a consideration there. I think that they would look to fortify the offensive line if possible. Would they take a running back here? Possibly, but I'm going to go with Brian Branch, who I think Buffalo will figure out a way to make a star.
Yeah, I think Jahmyr Gibbs as almost like a slot running back hybrid would be interesting here too. Not as a straight running back because I don't think the Bills would do that as a first-round pick. Cincinnati Bengals at 28, Tony. They have one of their offensive tackles demanding a trade, which I don't think is going to happen in Jonah Williams. They got their left tackle in the offseason in Orlando Brown, but could they use someone long-term on the right side? Do you want to add a tight end to help Joe Burrow? Because you might have to make a decision. You got Boyd, Higgins, and Jamar Chase. Or do you go defense here and just try to shore up that side of the ball? What are your thoughts?
I know that they like DJ Turner, the cornerback from Michigan, a lot, but I'm going to go with Dalton Kincaid. I mean, he's an immediate upgrade at the tight end position. You're right what you say about the tackle spot, although they've got some depth at the tackle position. They got players like Jackson Carman and Lael Collins still there. I do think they'll address that position later on. But I think, you bring Dalton Kincaid in, you just make Joe Burrow that more effective. And as we said, Dalton Kincaid could have gone in any number of half a dozen spots before the Cincinnati Bengals were called to the clock. He ends up with the Bengals.
All right, New Orleans Saints at 29. They're an organization that likes to draft players up front on offense and defense. And I'm taking a look here. You went Lucas Van Ness already. Myles Murphy also off the board. I mean, Will McDonald here, he's not really their type, though, in terms of they like bigger guys up front, Tony. So I'm not sure someone here matches unless you're going Brian Brzee, perhaps, or Edabare, maybe. What are your thoughts here for the Saints?
I like Edabare of Northwestern, but everything I'm hearing is Kalijah Kancey. Kalijah Kancey has cemented himself in the minds of people in the league as a first-round pick. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's what I'm hearing. And, I would take Edabare, but everything here points to New Orleans taking Kalijah Kancey. They may even move up to secure Kalijah Kancey from what I'm hearing. There may be a team at the top of round 2 who moves up ahead of the New Orleans Saints to select Kalijah Kancey.
All right, let's go to the Philadelphia Eagles at pick number 30, Tony. They already selected Nolan Smith, linebacker / edge player with pick number 10. Who do you like for the Eagles at 30 to complement that pick?
I was thinking about Brian Brzee at this spot, but I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs, who from the get-go has had a late first-round grade on my board. I've always had him as a late first, early second-round pick because I like Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm not going to start following along with everyone else and say he's a better prospect than Bijan Robinson. I don't believe that, but I do think he's a darn good running back in his own right. And in that Philadelphia system, I think he'd be a great fit as a pass catcher. You talked about the variety of ways you can use him. You don't need a true feature runner with Jalen Hurts there and those weapons at receiver and even tight end. You just need a guy that can do a lot of different things well, that can get 12 to 15 touches a game in a variety of ways, and that's Jahmyr Gibbs.
All right, one more pick here, Tony. Kansas City Chiefs at pick number 31. I think they can use some help up front on defense or Steve Spagnuolo. I also think they could use some more weapons in wide receiver. They lost McCole Hardman. They lost Juju Smith-Schuster. What are your thoughts for the Chiefs here as they try to repeat as Super Bowl champions?
I think the Chiefs are going to try and trade up to get Zay Flowers or Quentin Johnston. And the way the board has fallen, Quentin Johnston is still there. It just makes too much sense. A bigger body receiver whose game, I think, will mature and progress with Patrick Mahomes there, with the offensive minds that they have there. So if he, whether he's there at 31 or whether they have to trade up to get him, and they've worked him out in the offseason with Pat Mahomes, I think it's going to be Quentin Johnston.
Interesting. Would Jalen Hyatt there be a possibility too? They love those fast wide receivers with, they had Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman.
If Quentin Johnston isn't there, and if they don't trade up to get Zay Flowers, the next selection, the next guy on the board that would have been there for me would be Jalen Hyatt. They absolutely like Jalen Hyatt a lot. No doubt about it.
An excellent mock draft, folks. We appreciate Tony for doing it. Real quickly, I'll recap and then we'll do a couple questions and we'll say goodbye. Bryce Young, Will Anderson. I'm not going to list the teams, folks. You can figure it out. Bryce Young, Will Anderson, Paris Johnson, Tyree Wilson, Devon Witherspoon, CJ Stroud. That's to the Raiders. Bijan Robinson to the Falcons. Skoronski, Nolan Smith, Anthony Richardson to the Titans. Jalen Carter finally at 12 to the Texans. Packers take their wide receiver, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Broderick Jones done all right, back-to-back tackles, Pats and Jets. Christian Gonzalez all the way to 16 to the Commanders. Deontay Banks back-to-back corners to the Steelers. Michael Mayer, the big tight end to Detroit. Miles Murphy, Osiris Torrance, Jordan Addison to the Chargers. Joey Porter Jr. to the Ravens. Hendon Hooker to the Vikings. Lucas Van Ness, John Michael Schmitz to the Giants. Zay Flowers to the Cowboys. Brian Branch to the Bills. Dalton Kincaid to the Bengals. Kalijah Kancey, Jahmyr Gibbs to the Eagles, and Quentin Johnston to the Kansas City Chiefs. Tony, when you look at this draft, what's the big pivot point to you when you say this is the pick that could really impact everything that happens afterwards?
There's a bunch of them, really, when you look at it. You got to start with Houston at 2, right? I mean, do they take a quarterback? I'm not hearing that. But if we're all wrong and they take a quarterback, that's going to change a lot of things, because now Will Anderson is sitting there for the Cardinals at 2. If, in fact, Houston takes a defensive player and it is Will Anderson. So you got to look at 2. You got to look at 5 with the Seahawks, right? You mentioned the quarterback. I don't think it's going to happen. Jalen Carter, obviously, has got to be a possibility. They want to trade down. You look at 7 with the Raiders. I mean, the Raiders, Christian Gonzalez makes a ton of sense there. But if CJ Stroud falls into their laps, that may be just too enticing for them not to take CJ Stroud. The Chicago Bears could be a turning point. You go later on down the line, I think Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay. What happens is if Joey Porter, if three cornerbacks are off the board by the time that the Steelers select at 17, or let me start that again. If the Steelers select a cornerback and one of those top 4 cornerbacks are still available, whether it be Joey Porter, whether it be Deontay Banks, you got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers there at 19. You got the Seattle Seahawks there at 19. I could see both teams trading down to a team in the 20s, whether it be the Vikings, maybe the Ravens, whether it be the Giants, whether it be the Jacksonville Jaguars, who want to trade up to ensure that they get the bigger corner. So it starts early, but even later on down, when you get into the middle, bottom, or the beginning part of the bottom third of round 1, that it's also going to get interesting. I talk to a lot of people who, and I don't try and predict trades except to talk about what I'm hearing. A lot of people feel that there will be more trades between picks 9 to 20 than there will be between picks 1 to 9. So keep that in mind.
Should be a fun day, as you said, and we said it's going to be very unpredictable. Can't wait. We'll reaction to round 1 late night Thursday night, and you can listen to it on your way to work on Friday morning, and then we'll do a recap of the draft, obviously, when all is said on either Saturday night or Sunday morning. We'll have that for you on the weekend. For Tony Pauline, I'm John Sean. Thanks for being with us. This is draft season.